Back. All right. Okay, thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit today about how employers can use, and maybe use is the wrong word, but how employers can access second chance employees to help boost their bottom line. I am the furthest person in the world from telling employers that they should provide opportunity for folks that have some challenged backgrounds simply out of the goodness of their heart or because of altruism. I really believe that that's a secondary benefit. The reason why business owners and employers do anything is because it's got to be good for the bottom line. And I truly believe that by providing opportunity, that it is good for the bottom line. And I just want to talk about that a little bit today. So, very short agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what a second chance employee is, what are the benefits and what are the risks, and how does a company minimize those risks. And then if you are actually sitting across from a candidate that maybe has some of these things in their history, what are some things to look for when you're evaluating them to figure out whether they're a good risk to take or a relatively low risk to take? So the first thing, what is a second chance employee? I went and did a Google search, and frankly, I didn't find a definition that I really liked very much. So my own definition, based on personal experience, it's any individual who has a history or background that would make an employer think twice about hiring them. And I'll use myself as an example. So in 2006, 2007, I was a nationally recognized salesperson for a division of a Fortune 50 company. Had all the material trappings that came with that, a ton of professional success. I was also enrolled in the MBA program at University of Washington in the evening. So I'd go to work during the day, I'd be in class at night, and was doing pretty well in that program. So from the outside, life looked pretty good, quite frankly, but I also had a really dark secret. I was a pretty bad alcoholic and hard drug addict, and was really living a double life in a lot of ways. And as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to keep a life together when you're living a life that's so chaotic. And that certainly is what happened for me. By 2014, I was a homeless meth addict on the streets of Seattle, unemployable, petty criminal, spent the next couple of years in and out of jail, in and out of rehab, committed to a mental institution, managed to survive a couple of suicide attempts. And in the beginning of 2016, got sober and started putting my life back together. And I'm very fortunate because I have a stepmother who is a 25-year veteran of human resources and working as a hiring manager for companies. And so I was able to get a lot of guidance about how to put my employment life back together. But not everybody has that guidance, which is why I do the work that I do. And so in my story, there are a few things that might make an employer think twice, right? So I had a big job gap when I came back into the market. And on my resume, there was a 2-year job gap where, quite frankly, I was completely unemployable. So that might make an employer think twice. I had a history of addiction. Although I'd been in recovery, any employer that knew my story would certainly, maybe have some reservations about maybe hiring me. I'd been homeless, again, something that somebody might have reservations about. And I had some criminal history. Now, an employer or anyone being a bit leery about folks who might have some of these things in their background, it doesn't say anything about whether they're a good person or not. It's natural as human beings to maybe have some apprehension about encountering folks that have backgrounds that aren't similar to ours. It would only make sense for me to be sitting across from an employer and for them to ask me about my criminal convictions, and for the employer to maybe give second thought as to about whether they were going to hire me or not. But what I hope to share with you today is to let you know that those things don't necessarily have to be a complete barrier to providing an opportunity at employment for folks that are looking to put their lives back together. So just some brief statistics. So according to the FBI definition of criminal record, and that is, those are folks that have been convicted either of a misdemeanor or a felony, about 70 million people in the US have a criminal record. That's about 1 in 3 adults. In Washington State, there's over 1 million adults with a criminal record. So there's a pretty good chance that if you're an employer, you may already be employing someone with a criminal record and you might not know it, or maybe you do know it. And almost 21 million Americans are addicted to alcohol or drugs, and 11% of those seek treatment. And the reason why I included that last number is because obviously in the last few years, there's been a tremendous growth in the amount of people that are struggling with addiction, mainly because of the opioid crisis. But what that also means is that there's going to be more people like me. And when I say like me, there's going to be more people that are choosing to enter recovery and turn their lives around, which means that those are folks that are going to be looking for opportunity. And I really believe that just because someone took a detour or hit a bump, or like I say about my journey, hit a pothole in their journey, it shouldn't necessarily disqualify them from the opportunity to become tax-paying citizens again. And a lot of the work that needs to be done in this area is really just kind of easing some of the stigma. And that's one of the reasons why I talk so publicly about my struggles, because I truly believe that only people in recovery who have gone through it can really be the best messengers to let folks know that there is hope after having gone through some of these experiences. So what are the benefits of being open to the hiring of second chance employees? And notice I didn't put here, what are the benefits to hiring second chance employees? Because really what I want to do is start a conversation with hiring managers and employers that just talks about having a mindset that allows them to be open to at least talking to some of these candidates. And there's a few benefits, which I'll touch on now. So the first thing is exposure to a greater applicant pool. Obviously during the pandemic, the numbers of unemployed folks have gone up pretty significantly, but before the pandemic, and probably in the next couple of years after we get our arms around this thing, there was a pretty big shortage of folks available to hire, especially for entry-level positions, just because unemployment was so low. And really the only way that the easiest way to grow the hiring pool is for employers to be just a little bit more open about who they are willing to hire. Now, there is a pretty significant distance between having a policy where you absolutely won't hire anyone that has a criminal record and having a policy where you just take anybody off the street no matter what they've done in their past. And I'm certainly not suggesting that. What I typically suggest, because I also do some consulting for employers around how to open up their hiring policies, what I typically suggest is just opening the door about 10%. And by 10%, what I mean is if you currently have a policy that says that you absolutely won't hire people that have any criminal convictions, if you say, I'll be willing to take people that have had misdemeanors that happened over 3 years ago, as an example. So it opens the door just a little bit, but again, it gives you exposure to more folks who may actually end up being good candidates and great applicants. Quite frankly, there's also a lot less competition because there is still such a stigma attached to folks that have some of those things in the background that I mentioned earlier. There are less employers competing for this pool of applicants. So as opposed to being 5 employers competing for one applicant, you kind of get your choice of, you'd be more in the position where you're one employer with your opportunity to review 5 different applicants and having the chance to kind of pick and choose a little bit. So you get to, you're going to have greater choice and greater opportunity, again, to find that next great candidate. You might even get an employee with better skills and experience. And I'll, again, use myself as an example, but there's lots of folks that I know where this is the case. When I entered recovery, even though I'd worked great jobs and made a bunch of money, and even though I had an MBA, the first recovery job, and by recovery job, what I mean is, it's the first job where people that are kind of in recovery from whatever condition, the first job you can kind of get, usually pretty easy jobs to get, but really allows folks to get their feet under them and become dependable again and prove that they can work and be accountable. The first job I took was part-time scrubbing toilets. I was a janitor. It was a job that, quite frankly, I never thought I was going to do. But it ended up being a great job for me because, again, it allowed me to get back into the workforce. And I was able to take that experience and actually flip that about a year later into a really great job. But that first great job I got, which I ended up keeping for 3 years, the small employer that hired me otherwise would never have been able to afford somebody like me. And when I say somebody like me, I mean somebody who had a wealth of work experience, had some education under his belt. It really is only because, as I like to put it, my employer got me off the scratch and dent pile that they were able to have somebody like me in their organization. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that an employer should dip into this pool of applicants specifically with the goal of underpaying for someone. but it certainly is a potential benefit. There are lots of folks who had great lives happening before this, bump in the road, and they're looking to get back to that. And so there's a wealth of experience that you will often be able to tap into. But again, in order to do that, you first have to be open to even having a conversation with folks that are working with those sorts of backgrounds. The other thing is that when you give people an opportunity, people with backgrounds like that tend to be really loyal for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're just so grateful for the opportunity that they've received that they tend to kind of stick around a little while. But the other thing is, quite frankly, depending on the situation that they're coming from, they just might not have a lot of options, quite frankly. So their ability to be able to go somewhere else may be hampered, and working in your company and providing you with a great experience as an employer is really the best way that they have to work and go to something else. Because trust me, on the way out the door, what I advise my clients to do is always get that recommendation letter if they can, which means that when you're there, you work as hard as you can, you be the best employee that you can, so you can make that happen on the way out the door. And then another thing, in Washington State at least, there are tax credits, and there's also free bonding. So there is a work opportunity tax credit that employers can take advantage of if they hire folks that are from one of those backgrounds that I mentioned. And then also the Employment Security Department of Washington State offers free bonding. So if you work in an industry where you're concerned that if you hire someone with a criminal background where they might steal, there's a free bond up to $25,000 that will cover anything around theft and dishonesty. So it's going to provide you some protection, again, 100% free, and a benefit just to making an opportunity for folks that may have some of these backgrounds. And so what are the risks? There's three risks that I think about. Basically the biggest risk is that the employee is going to fail in some way. I would kind of argue, though, that some of these risks are no different than the risks that you might have with regular employees. So obviously, if you have someone like me who was an addict in the past, relapse is always an issue. Theft can be an issue if they have a criminal history, and you might have a disciplinary problem. But again, there's an interesting statistic. So 70% of people that have an addiction or an alcohol problem are already employed. So what that means is, if you don't think that you have someone in your organization who has a drug or an alcohol problem, you might be wrong about that. So the potential for, again, this thing with drug and alcohol use causing some issues or causing theft or causing a disciplinary problem is already prevalent, likely, in your employee population already. So while these are certainly risks, they're not ones that are only inherent to giving people a second opportunity. But there are some ways to actually mitigate the risk. And by the way, it might not be as risky as you think. So SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, did a survey of hiring managers who have actually already hired people that needed second chances. And it found that 82% of those managers said that those employees were as good or better than those without criminal records. So there actually is some data now that says that, just as we've been talking about, that giving folks a second chance might not be as big a risk or a gamble as folks think. But there are some ways to actually mitigate it and make it an even lower risk. So ways you minimize that, I'm going to give you some 5 free ways right now that if you're a hiring manager or an employer and you're considering hiring folks like this, that you can minimize your risk doing it. The biggest thing is that you use programs that screen and train employees. And there are quite a few of these. And I've looked up some stuff specifically for Bellingham and Whatcom County. And so there's Worksource Whatcom, and there's the Vocational Rehabilitation of Whatcom, or DVR, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Both of those are state agencies that provide worker retraining, transitional employment, and employment opportunities for individuals that are coming from some of these challenged backgrounds. And the great thing about it is that these agencies really love interfacing with employers. I work for Worksource in Everett, and my job, literally my job, is to connect with employers in the community that would either be willing to offer transitional employment or are open to permanent employment for the clients that we work with. And the great thing about both of these programs is they don't deem people to be work ready until they're actually work ready. So typically what will happen is individuals or clients of these programs will go through some sort of training program or worker retraining program where they get assessment, feedback, coaching, mentoring, soft skill preparation, and upskill. So that when they actually are, when the agency says they're ready to go to work, they're actually ready to go to work and they can show up and be a dependable employee. In many cases, actually, I think in all cases, these folks have also been drug tested. They've been background checked. So you're going to have a pretty good sense of the type of person that you're getting. And honestly, you're going to have a lot more information about these folks than you would ever have about someone that you place an ad for on Indeed or an ad on Craigslist. You're going to have quite a bit of information about them. The other place are transitional employment programs. So really, really similar to the same type of work that Worksource and vocational rehabilitation do. But typically transitional employment programs are run by nonprofit organizations. I have a list of those that I'm going to provide for you on the resource page here at the end, specifically for Whatcom County. But they, again, do kind of the same thing. They provide transitional employment, work upskilling, feedback, evaluation, training, coaching on soft skills and work skills for folks so that they are actually employment ready. Community colleges are also a great source of potential employees. So one of the things that I did when I got sober was, besides taking a recovery job, is I enrolled in a manufacturing certification program at my local community college. And I did that through a grant with the state because I was on state assistance at the time. And there were quite a few people that were in that program that were kind of putting it back together like I was. And the great thing about these community college programs is that most of the requirements that they have are actually very similar to what people would have when they have a job. There's an attendance requirement. There is a requirement that work is turned in on time, that the quality of that work is up to a certain standard. There are time management and materials management components of the program. And the career navigators that are connected with the program, that is the folks who ultimately do placement of graduates in the program, have a lot of connection and contact with the folks in the program, so they can give an employer a really, really good sense of who might be a good employee, who's on the right track, and who might not be such a great candidate to take a look at. And again, all of these resources, 100% free. And every single one of these organizations loves to work with employers. They have programs specifically set up so that they can do that. So I would encourage you to take a look at this in your community and see what you can make happen if you're interested in making an opportunity available. And then the last thing is not actually a program, but just kind of something on a practical basis. Personal networks. So, one of the, I actually speak to a lot of different groups. I speak to Rotary clubs, I speak to chambers of commerce, and I often will ask the question of folks, and I'll ask it now. So who here on this call knows someone who is in recovery, just by a show of hands? Okay. All right. And so if you know someone that's in recovery or someone who's been impacted by drugs or alcohol, people that are doing well in recovery pretty much typically always know people that are doing well in recovery. So a really good place to start, if you have an employee that is known to you that is in recovery, ask that employee if they know anybody else who might need a second chance in employment, or check in your personal networks and see if you know anybody. These are obviously referrals are great ways to find employees, but lots and lots of folks that need a second chance, they don't know what companies offer it, because this is not necessarily a company, something that companies want to advertise a lot. So again, use your personal networks, and that's a great way for you to also find folks that have been vetted to some degree, because there's some sort of connection there with them. And then finally, I just want to talk really quickly about, so you're sitting across from a candidate who, and they have one of these challenge backgrounds, or you pick up a resume and they've got a job gap on their resume, and you're wondering how you can, what things to kind of look for as you're evaluating them to figure out whether they might be a low risk or a lower risk. And there's a few things. So take a look at, if they've got a job gap on their resume, take a look at anything they've done since the job gap to improve their skills or any type of employment they've had. So if someone has a job gap on their resume, maybe you can look and see, since that job gap, have they done anything to upskill? Have they taken any online courses? Have they gone back to community college? Have they gotten any certifications? Have they done anything to indicate that they are engaged in a process of self-improvement? Also, obviously, have they had any employment, be it part-time employment or full-time employment? even if it's not related to the position that they're applying for. These are all indications that this is someone who's trying to do the right thing. Of course, any positive references, letters of recommendation, references, any third-party validation that these folks are actually on the right track and willing to do the right thing and may be a relatively low risk in hiring. If they have good work history prior to the job gap. So again, if they seem to be pretty good employees before, you can verify some of that work history and see that they were pretty solid before they hit this period in their life. That might be a good indication that they might be a relatively low risk. If they've got criminal convictions, but they're not related to the job. So if they have a marijuana conviction, but the job that they have is not related to that in any way, shape, or form, that may be an indication that this might be someone you can take a risk on. I certainly wouldn't suggest to you that if somebody had a theft conviction last year, that you should hire them to work in a bank. But if it makes sense, then certainly take a look if those convictions are not related to the job and maybe give them some consideration. If they have just one conviction, or if there's a pretty low number, if they just have one or two, you may want to give them some extra consideration. That's not to say that people who, I don't mean to say that people who might be serial offenders don't deserve a second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance. I truly believe that. But as an employer, if you see a background that says that they only have a single or a low number of convictions, you may want to give that some consideration, because that probably says that they're not a serial offender and they're less likely to cause issues in the future. And then also length of time since the conviction. So if somebody has a conviction that was, 15 years ago, you may want to give that some consideration. My last conviction was 5 years ago. So I'm rapidly approaching the window where most employers are going to start to figure out that, yes, I have begun to live my life in a much different way. And so all of these things can be used as ways for an employer to evaluate a candidate as to whether or not they might be a relatively low risk in hiring. And so here's some specific resources for Whatcom County. Feel free to, if you're interested, take a picture of this, write it down, but there's DVR Whatcom, there's Worksource. Worksource Washington doesn't actually have a Bellingham specific website, but if you go to Worksource WA, you can find the Bellingham or Whatcom County chapter. And then this Opportunity Council, this is actually a really interesting website. So you want to go to that link, you click on jobs and then click on training programs. And what that does is it actually provides a filter to all the transitional training programs, for transitional employment training programs, I should say, in Island, Whatcom, and Skagit County. And there are quite a few of those there who are nonprofits that provide transitional employment training for individuals that kind of have some challenged backgrounds. So again, I just tried to make this as easy as I possibly could for anyone who might be interested to actually go and take a look for folks who may be seeking an opportunity. So I'm going to leave that up for just a few seconds. I see that there's, and I guess I just want to stop here for a second. I know I talk really fast. Are there any questions that I can answer for anyone, or any comments that anybody has? And I'll go to after I leave this up for a few more seconds, I will go to the chat and see if there's any questions there, because I can't see it while I'm sharing my screen. Okay.
We actually use the Opportunity Council.
Awesome.
Yeah, at the chamber through a program. Yeah, but during this COVID thing, haven't got anyone yet, but for this year, but it's worked out pretty well. So
yeah, it's awesome. I didn't even know that. This wasn't even a plant. I looked this up independently on my own, and yet Liz hopped right in and pointed out that I did the right thing. Thank you, Liz.
So, we've used the Birch Bay Chamber to find a really good employee.
Yeah. So again, that gets back to that referral thing, right? So you use your network, you reach out to folks that you know in order to kind of make it happen. So on the next slide, and again, I provide individual career coaching for people that are in recovery. So if you know anyone who's in recovery, if they can't afford to pay, I actually do a pro bono for folks that can't afford. If they can afford to pay, I'm going to charge them. But if they can't afford to pay, I'm going to do it for free. So here's my contact info. I also do some consulting for employers who are interested in perhaps diversifying their workforce and bringing in folks that have these challenged or unique backgrounds. Again, it's a passion of mine. It's something that I have personally lived through. So I'm always happy to try to provide opportunity in any way that I can for folks that need it. All right, so let me see, can I read the chat? Let me see. Oh, I can read the chat. Awesome. Okay. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Danielle, for providing my info. I appreciate it.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments? It's good a lot of good information. So.
Well, good. I'm glad. So Liz, you mentioned that you guys have hired some folks with challenged backgrounds in the past at the chamber.
It's like a work program for some people through the Opportunity Council, and they actually get paid through them. So it's like job training on our side. And I think some of them, the 2 girls that have been here, have gotten real jobs from training at the chamber. So
yeah, that's actually so that's exactly the program that Worksource has. So Worksource has a program where they effectively, Worksource acts as a free staffing agency, and so they keep them as they're the employer of record. They work for your organization, but you don't have to pay them. You don't have to do anything. So it's a great opportunity for an employer to be able to try out some employees and see if they might work out, and then maybe move them into permanent employment. And even if they don't, it's a great opportunity for the individual to get that work experience and now have something they can put on their resume and hopefully be able to use the chamber for a letter of recommendation when they go.
Yep, it worked out I know for a couple of them. So I think it's a great program for some of those people. So Matt could agree too. Right. Yeah, it's great. I encourage everyone to use it. You know, sometimes it doesn't work out. There's been sometimes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, you know, I'm not naive enough to say that
right.
Every candidate that has a challenged background is going to be a good one. But the good news is that, that same great candidate that you found on Indeed or on Craigslist, and that same crappy candidate that you found on Indeed and Craigslist can be found in the population of people who have challenged backgrounds. Because it's just like anything else. There's a wide variety of quality. And it's just a matter of picking and choosing and using some of the resources I pointed out to kind of minimize the risk.
Hi, I'm a director with the Birch Bay Chamber.
Hi.
And most of our issues with the girls that we've had come in from Opportunity Council has been transportation issues and things like that you might expect that they have if they live in Bellingham to get out and be on time to Birch Bay and all. And it seems so unfortunate that all kinds of things, come into their lives. They don't have automobiles, and, it's just sad to watch, really. And they may be a very good person to fill and begin their work, but, they low income and all kinds of things that complicate everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's luckily there's a number of state programs that kind of help with that, but geography is a challenge. One of the things that when I work with my individual clients and I talk to them about getting that, that recovery job. So those first couple of jobs when you finally start to put life back together is to make sure that it's something in your local area. So that attendant, something you can walk to or something you can hop on a bus to get to, so that number one, you can attend and be a good employee. Because employers say they want a bunch of stuff, but employers basically want 3 things. They want somebody who's going to show up, somebody who's going to show up on time, and somebody who's going to show up on time with a good attitude. That's kind of it. If you can do those 3 things, everything else, can be taught and kind of takes care of itself. So your point about, the shame of folks having challenges with transportation is true. But, I certainly, I did a lot of bus riding in early recovery. I did a lot of it, and I did a lot of walking in early recovery. So it is a challenge, but there are ways to kind of work around it. I would hope that they're able to find some opportunities that are closer to where they are.
And they try to, and those programs are made for people to, and the Opportunity Council and stuff, they will work with these people and help them out as much as you put in, they're going to give to you too. Like, you have to put in the effort too.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because self-advocacy is something that I don't think enough people talk about. There's a lot of resources available. And quite frankly, there's a lot of good people out there that are willing to help people. There just are, because it's just the nature of people. People are basically good. But as an individual who is trying to put life back together, I have a responsibility too. And my responsibility is to make phone calls and send emails. And if I got to call more than once, I call more than once. If I got to send more than one email, I send more than one email, because I've got to advocate on behalf of myself to access the resources that are available. Unfortunately, some people want to show up and have other people do everything for them. Recovering from a checkered past is not for people who need it. It's for people who want it, period. So the people that want it are going to do the things that are necessary to start putting life back together. And if you don't want to do it, bless your heart. I got love for you, but I'm here to be the navigator. I'm not here to be the driver. You got to drive. I'll point out where you got to go and I'll give you direction, but you got to drive the car, period.
And when it works, so when the people put in the effort for it, the system works with them, and it comes out such great success stories. So
absolutely, one of the greatest things I see some of the greatest joys in what I do, and I see some of the most heartbreaking things in what I do. It is it's really rewarding, and it can sometimes, frankly, be really punishing. But I would never do anything else. Thank you guys so much for letting me be here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming on. Does anyone else have any comments or anything before we go around and get an update from everyone on this crazy week in Washington? I don't know.
I'm particularly upset I can't go to the gym anymore. That's very upsetting to me. But,
Yeah.
I know how we're doing it. It's just not fun.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then Danielle, do you take this back, or how does this work?